I should have never walked into that building. I should have ignored the bright neon sign outside, glowing like a trap in the dark. Free personality test. Discover your true self. I should have ignored the man standing on the sidewalk, his grin stretched just a little too wide as he handed out pamphlets. His eyes were wrong, hollow, as if something had been scooped out from inside him, leaving only an empty shell behind. But I was at my lowest. And that's when they find you. I had just lost my job, my girlfriend had moved out, and my friends had slowly drifted away. My life felt like it was unraveling piece by piece, and no matter what I did, I couldn't put it back together. So when I saw that sign, I thought, what do I have to lose? The answer was everything. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The air felt thick, like a room that had been sealed shut for too long. The lobby was pristine, too pristine. White walls, soft golden lighting, and rows of neatly arranged chairs where people sat in unnerving stillness, not scrolling through their phones, not fidgeting, just staring. A woman approached me almost instantly. She had blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun, her navy blue suit pressed to perfection. Her smile was polite but empty, like it had been practiced in a mirror for hours until it became a permanent mask. "Welcome," she said. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Are you here for the test?" I nodded. I don't know why, but something inside me told me that if I said no, she wouldn't let me leave. She gestured toward a small windowless room down the hall. The further I walked, the quieter the building seemed. It was like stepping into a vacuum where the rest of the world no longer existed. Inside the room, there was a single desk with a thick booklet placed neatly on top. A chair sat waiting for me. The woman handed me a pen, then stepped back. "You'll answer honestly, won't you?" she said. It didn't sound like a question. The booklet contained hundreds of questions. Some seemed normal. Do you consider yourself a leader or a follower? Do you work well under pressure? But then the questions became odd. Do you ever feel like someone is watching you, even when you're alone? Have you ever suspected that your thoughts aren't really your own? Would you be willing to sacrifice everything for the truth? I frowned. What the hell kind of test was this? Still, I answered them all. And when I finished, I looked up to see the woman already standing by the door, as if she had been waiting the entire time without making a sound. She took the booklet from me and skimmed through it at an unnatural speed, as if she already knew what the answers would be. Then she smiled. "There's a lot of potential in you," she said. The way she said it made my stomach twist. "There's someone who would love to meet you," she continued. "Come with me." I should have left right then. I should have run. But instead, I followed her deeper into the building, down a hallway that seemed too long, like it stretched farther than the building should allow. And at the end of that hall was the door that sealed my fate. The room was small and featureless, except for a desk, 2 chairs, and a strange device placed at the center. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie. A metal box with 2 cylinders connected by wires. A man sat across from the desk, waiting. He was bald, wearing the same navy blue suit, but his eyes were different. Not empty. Hungry. "Welcome," he said, his voice low and controlled. I swallowed hard. "What is this?" "This," he said, sliding the metal cylinders toward me, "is going to change your life." I hesitated. My hands hovered over the cold metal. Something inside me screamed not to touch them. I had the overwhelming feeling that the moment my fingers closed around those cylinders, I would no longer be me. But the man just smiled, and the door behind me clicked shut. The click of the door behind me was soft, barely more than a whisper. But it felt deafening. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I just knew, that it was locked. The bald man across the table was still smiling, his fingers resting lightly on the strange metal device. The E-meter, they called it. I had read about it before, a crude lie detector-like machine they used in their auditing sessions. A way to measure hidden thoughts, trauma, past lives, whatever they claimed it did. I wasn't sure why, but something about it sent a sick feeling curling in my stomach. "Go ahead," the man said, pushing the 2 metal cylinders toward me. "Hold them." I hesitated. His smile didn't falter, but something in his posture changed. His shoulders tensed, his fingers twitching ever so slightly, as if he was waiting to see if I would disobey him. A strange pressure filled the room, like the air itself was pushing down on me. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached forward and wrapped my fingers around the cylinders. The moment I touched them, something shifted in the air. The machine gave a soft hum, the needle twitching erratically. "Good," the man murmured. He adjusted a dial on the machine, his eyes locked onto mine. "Let's begin." The questions. At first, the questions were simple. Are you happy with your life? No. Do you ever feel like you are meant for something greater? I guess. But as the session went on, the questions started getting stranger. Have you ever felt like your thoughts aren't your own? What? The man didn't repeat himself, he just watched me, waiting. No, I finally said, shifting in my seat. The needle on the machine jerked violently. The man's eyes flicked to the dial, then back to me. Interesting, he said, adjusting a knob. Let's try something else. I swallowed hard, my palms were starting to sweat against the cold metal. What is your biggest regret? The room felt hotter all of a sudden. I didn't want to answer. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like whatever I said would be used against me. I don't know, I muttered. The needle twitched again. The man chuckled softly. Lying won't help you, he said. His voice was still calm, still polite, but there was something dark underneath it now. I felt trapped. I guess. I hesitated, licking my dry lips. I regret not doing more with my life, not being better. I regret being weak. The needle steadied. The man nodded, as if I had finally given the right answer. You're carrying a lot of pain inside you, he said. We can help with that. I should have left. I should have thrown the metal cylinders down, demanded they let me go. But instead, I just sat there, my mind foggy, my limbs heavy. And that's when the whispers started. The voices, at first, I thought I was imagining it. A faint, almost inaudible murmur, like someone speaking in the next room, just barely out of reach. I frowned, glancing toward the walls. The room was windowless, featureless. There was no next room. I shifted uncomfortably. Did you hear that? The man didn't react. Hear what? I strained my ears. The whispers were growing clearer, just a little. Like voices speaking over one another, too fast to fully understand. The needle on the machine began jumping wildly, swinging back and forth like it was trying to tear itself from its casing. The murmurs grew louder, and suddenly I understood them. They're watching you. You need to run. Don't let them take you. I jerked my hands away from the metal cylinders, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The voices stopped instantly. Silence. The man tilted his head, watching me like a scientist observing a rat in a maze. What's wrong? He asked. I swallowed hard. My pulse was pounding in my ears. Who? My throat was so dry it hurt. Who else is in this building? The man's smile widened. No one, he said. He reached forward and pushed the e-meter toward me again. Let's continue. I stared at the metal cylinders like they were poisonous. Something was very, very wrong here, and I had just made the worst mistake of my life. I didn't move. The metal e-meter sat on the desk between us, its wires tangled like veins, the two metal cylinders still carrying the lingering warmth of my hands. The air in the room felt too thick, heavy with something unseen. The bald man's smile never wavered, but his fingers twitched ever so slightly as he pushed the device toward me again. Let's continue, he said, his voice smooth and patient, like a spider beckoning a fly back into its web. My hands refused to move. Every instinct in my body was screaming that if I picked those things up again, I wouldn't be the same person when I let go. I swallowed hard. I don't think this is for me. For the first time since I walked into the room, the man's expression changed. The smile faltered, his jaw tightening just a little. Oh, he said. You were doing so well. The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he had been expecting me to break. Like this was some kind of test. I pushed my chair back an inch. Yeah, I think I should go. The man didn't move, neither did I. For a long moment, we just stared at each other in silence. Then he sighed. shaking his head like a disappointed teacher. "That's unfortunate," he said. He pressed a button on the side of the e-meter and the device powered down with a soft hiss. "You seemed like someone ready to change their life." I forced a small, nervous laugh. "Yeah, maybe not today." I stood up, expecting him to try to stop me, but instead he just nodded. "All right," he said, "if you're not ready, we won't force you." A rush of relief flooded through me. Maybe I had been overreacting. Maybe this was just some weird, overly aggressive self-help thing and not the horror show my mind was conjuring up. But then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Still," he continued, watching me carefully, "I'd recommend you come back soon." My hand froze on the doorknob. "We wouldn't want you to leave things unfinished." I didn't respond. I just yanked the door open and stepped out, heart pounding. The hallway that wasn't right. The hallway felt different than before. When I had first walked down it, it had been a simple stretch of polished floors and featureless doors. But now it felt longer. The lighting was dimmer, the air was warmer, almost humid, carrying a faint metallic tang that made me think of blood. And worst of all, I couldn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices, no murmur of distant conversations. Just silence. I walked faster. My shoes barely made a sound against the floor, as if the very walls were swallowing every bit of noise. I passed by several doors, each one identical, but something deep in my gut told me they weren't really empty. I could feel something behind them, watching, waiting. I gritted my teeth and focused on getting to the lobby. It had to be close, right? But the hallway just kept going. I swore I had walked this same stretch already. Something was wrong, very wrong. And then I heard footsteps, software unrushed. Behind me. I didn't want to look. But my body moved before my mind could stop it. I turned around, the man in the suit. There was a man standing at the end of the hall. Tall, thin, wearing the same navy blue suit as the others, but there was something wrong with him. He didn't move. He didn't even seem to breathe. And his face was blurred, not hidden, not in shadow. It was like my eyes couldn't process it, like my brain refused to let me see him properly. A sharp, twisting panic shot through my chest. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, hard. I turned and started running. I didn't care if it was unhinged. I didn't care if someone saw me. All I knew was that I had to get out before that thing reached me. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. The hallway finally opened up into the lobby, and I practically stumbled into it, gasping for air. The blonde receptionist was still there, smiling, too wide, too fake, as if she hadn't moved the entire time I had been inside. "How was your session?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. I didn't answer. I bolted toward the glass doors. I reached for the handle, and my hand hit solid wall. There was no door, just a reflection of myself, staring back at me from the smooth, mirror-like surface. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The receptionist was still smiling. "Sir?" she asked. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred at the edges. I turned around, looking for another exit. Any exit. And then I saw the bald man from the auditing session, standing just a few feet away. His face was neutral, calm, like he had expected this. "Perhaps," he said, voice smooth as silk, "you should sit back down." I didn't move. I couldn't. Because behind him, in the dimly lit hallway, I saw the blurred man again, standing closer, watching, waiting. And this time, I knew he wasn't alone. I couldn't breathe. My heart was slamming against my ribs, my chest heaving as I stared at the blurred man standing behind the bald auditor. Closer now. His faceless head tilted ever so slightly, as if he were examining me, judging me. But the worst part? He wasn't alone. I saw others in the hallway behind him now. More men in suits, more figures whose faces my mind refused to process, standing in the shadows, their heads tilting in perfect, synchronized unison. I took a shaky step backward, my fingers pressing against the smooth, doorless glass wall behind me. Trapped. The receptionist was still smiling, watching me with that glassy-eyed stare, as if nothing was wrong. The bald man sighed, as if disappointed. "I was hoping you wouldn't resist," he said. "It's always harder when they resist." My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. "This isn't real," I whispered. "This isn't real." I was hallucinating. Had they drugged me, brainwashed me? I needed to get out. Now the bald man gestured toward the chairs. "Sit," he said. I shook my head. His eyes darkened. I wasn't asking. And then they started walking toward me. The chase I didn't think, I just moved. I turned and bolted. Not toward the hallway where the faceless men were, but to the side, to the receptionist's desk. If the glass doors weren't real, then maybe nothing was. I leapt onto the desk, sending papers and a beeping phone scattering to the floor. The receptionist gasped, her smile faltering for the first time. "What are you—" I didn't hear the rest. Because I was already jumping over the desk, and the moment my feet hit the ground on the other side, the world shifted. It was like stepping through a rip in reality. 1 second, I was in the reception area, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The next, I wasn't. I was standing in a long, dimly lit corridor. The walls were concrete, rough and unfinished, streaked with dark stains. The air smelled wrong, damp, metallic, rotten, and worst of all, there were no doors, just an endless grey hallway stretching into the darkness. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I turned around, but the lobby was gone. No receptionist, no bald man, no glass doors. Nothing. I was alone. Or so I thought, because then the whispers started again, software unintelligible, coming from the walls. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. Number no, no, no. But the whispers only grew louder. They were inside my head. I stumbled forward, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The hallway was tilting, twisting, like I was walking through a dream that had gone rotten. And then I saw it. At the very end of the corridor, there was a single wooden door, old, warped, like it had been sitting there for centuries. The whispering stopped. I didn't want to go near it, but I had nowhere else to go. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to move forward, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. It was ice cold. I turned it, and the door swung open on its own. The room beyond was pitch black, not the kind of darkness you get when you turn off a light, something deeper, something that felt alive. I took a step inside, and immediately the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers returned. But this time they were laughing. I spun around, my heart hammering. I couldn't see anything, not even my own hands. The darkness was absolute. And then a hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed, jerking back, but the grip tightened. It was ice cold, too long, too many fingers, and then the whispers turned into words. "We see you now." I thrashed, trying to break free, but the thing didn't let go. "You shouldn't have come here." I felt something move in the darkness. Not just one thing, many things. I tried to scream again, but something covered my mouth. A second hand. Long, wrong. And then I felt breath against my ear. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a growl. "Welcome to the Sea Org." And then I was pulled into the dark. The darkness swallowed me whole. My screams never made it past my throat as the cold, unnatural hands dragged me deeper into the void. There was no floor beneath my feet, no sense of gravity or direction, only the suffocating weight of something unseen pressing against me from all sides. The whispering voices had turned into laughter, low and guttural, like a chorus of unseen mouths mocking my struggle. My body was suspended in nothingness, my limbs numb and useless, as if I had become a part of the void itself. Then, suddenly, I was falling. The weight around me vanished in an instant, and gravity slammed back into my body with brutal force. I plummeted through the blackness, my stomach twisting into knots as icy air rushed past me. The fall seemed endless, stretching into eternity, until, without warning, I hit something solid. The impact sent a sharp jolt of pain through my entire body, knocking the breath from my lungs. I lay there, gasping, my hands pressing against the cold, damp ground beneath me. It felt like concrete, rough and uneven, but the surface was strangely warm, pulsing as if it were alive. A dim, flickering light illuminated the space around me. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing the walls, tall, curved, and covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when I looked at them. The air was thick with a metallic scent, and in the distance I could hear a slow, rhythmic dripping, like water seeping through cracks in the walls. I pushed myself up, my body trembling, and turned in a slow circle, trying to understand where I was. This wasn't the church. This wasn't anywhere that should exist. A sound made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Not the usual kind, not the steady rhythm of a person walking, but something uneven, something deliberate, like something crawling on too many legs. The sound echoed through the vast chamber, coming from everywhere at once, and I realized with growing dread that I wasn't alone. My breathing turned ragged as I scanned the shadows, but the flickering light barely extended beyond a few feet. The rest was swallowed in impenetrable blackness. Then, from the void, something moved. A shape, no, multiple shapes, shifting and stretching unnaturally. I could only catch glimpses between the flashes of light, but what I saw made my stomach churn. Twisted figures, too tall, their limbs elongated and moving with an unnatural fluidity. Their faces, or what should have been faces, were smooth, featureless expanses of pale flesh, as if their identities had been erased. They moved without sound, their bodies undulating like they weren't quite solid, like they weren't meant to exist in this reality. I stumbled back, my hands reaching for anything I could use to defend myself, but there was nothing. Just the cold, pulsing ground and the endless void pressing in from all sides. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as the figures drew closer, their movements slow, deliberate, as if they were savoring my fear. I turned to run, but before I could take a step, the light flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness once more. Panic exploded inside me. I staggered blindly, my hands outstretched, desperate to find a way out. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin like unseen hands trying to drag me back. The whispers returned, curling around me like smoke, their words clearer now. They spoke of things I didn't understand, of knowledge I was never meant to have. My name slithered through the voices, whispered from lips that shouldn't have known it. Then something touched me. A cold, clammy hand slid around my wrist, fingers tightening with an inhuman strength. I tried to pull away, but the grip was relentless, pulling me forward into the suffocating dark. My pulse roared in my ears as I struggled, twisting and thrashing, but the unseen force only dragged me faster. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, becoming deafening until they weren't whispers at all, but a cacophony of voices screaming inside my skull. Then, light. It was sudden and blinding, searing into my eyes as I was hurled forward. The moment my body hit the ground, the screams stopped. The darkness peeled away like mist in the morning sun, revealing the lobby, the receptionist's desk, the same plastic smiles, the same artificial warmth in the air. It was as if I had never left. I lay there, gasping, my hands clutching at the floor beneath me, my mind struggling to understand what had just happened. The blonde receptionist glanced up from her desk, her expression unchanged, as if she hadn't just witnessed me appearing out of thin air. "Sir," she asked, her voice smooth and pleasant, "are you all right?" I stared at her, my breath still coming in ragged gasps. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I could still feel the icy grip of that thing on my wrist, the echo of the whispers still crawling through my mind. And then, I felt it. A lingering touch, a cold imprint on my skin where that hand had held me. My gaze dropped to my wrist, and my breath caught in my throat. A mark. Dark, almost burned into my flesh, a symbol I had never seen before, but somehow knew wasn't meant to be there. The receptionist smiled, tilting her head. "Would you like to schedule another session?" I bolted for the door. This time, when I reached for the handle, it was there. The glass doors were solid beneath my grip, and I yanked them open, stumbling into the bright afternoon sunlight. The street was normal. People walked by, oblivious. Cars honked. Life moved on as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I turned, looking back at the building. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary. Just another church, just another place on a busy city block. But as I stared at the windows, my stomach twisted. Because in one of them, behind the glass, something was watching me. a faceless figure standing motionless in the shadows. And as I took a step back, it raised its hand and waved. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away. My lungs burned, my legs felt weak, and my mind screamed at me to keep going. But I forced myself to stop. I leaned against a lamppost, gasping for breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I was out. I was free. But something was wrong. I could still feel it. That mark on my wrist. It burned, like an old wound that refused to heal. I hesitated before rolling up my sleeve, already knowing I wouldn't like what I saw. The dark symbol, burned, carved, or imprinted into my skin, looked more vivid now, almost like it had sunk deeper into my flesh. The edges throbbed, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I rubbed at it furiously, as if I could scrub it off, but the skin beneath my fingers remained unchanged. My breath hitched. This wasn't normal, this wasn't right. I needed to get away, as far as possible. I checked my phone. I had no service. That didn't make sense. I was in the middle of a busy street, surrounded by people, cars, life. I opened and closed my messages, refreshed my signal, turned airplane mode on and off. Nothing. A cold sweat prickled the back of my neck. That was when I noticed the people. They weren't looking at me, not directly, but every time I turned my head, I could see them, lingering at the edge of my vision. A businessman standing too still at a crosswalk. A woman on a park bench, her hands resting motionless on her lap. A man pretending to tie his shoe, yet he never finished the motion. They were watching me. I turned in a slow circle, my pulse hammering. How many of them were there? They were everywhere, scattered among the crowd like ordinary people, but I could tell they weren't. Their movements were too controlled, their bodies too rigid, like puppets waiting for a string to pull. And then, one of them turned their head, not in a normal way. The motion was too smooth, too precise, like a camera panning. Our eyes met. Or at least I thought they did, because the man had no eyes. Just smooth, pale flesh where they should have been. I stumbled backward, my breath catching. I spun on my heel and started walking, fast. Don't run. If I ran, they'd chase me. I didn't know how I knew that. I just did. I needed to get out of here. I ducked into an alleyway, my mind racing. I needed to get my phone working, find someone, anyone who wasn't like them. But the deeper I went, the more I realized the city was wrong. The buildings were familiar, yet slightly off. The street signs didn't have names, only strange symbols that shifted when I tried to read them. The cars passed by, their engines humming unnaturally, but their windows were blacked out. No drivers, no passengers. I turned another corner and froze. The street I had just left was in front of me again, the same crosswalk, the same businessman, the same woman on the bench. I had just walked in the opposite direction. My stomach twisted. This wasn't the city, not anymore. I turned around, ready to retrace my steps, when I saw them, the eyeless people, standing at the entrance of the alleyway, blocking my way out. There were more of them now, too many. They didn't move at first, just stood there silent and still, their featureless faces turned toward me. And then they stepped forward, all at once. I ran. I didn't care if they chased me now. I had to get out. My feet pounded against the pavement as I darted down the alley, taking random turns trying to shake them. But no matter where I went, the city looped back on itself. I turned a corner and found myself back in front of the Church of Scientology. The glass doors were wide open, and standing just inside was the bald man, waiting for me, smiling. "I told you," he said, "it's always harder when they resist." I skidded to a stop, my chest heaving. Behind me the eyeless figures were closing in. I was trapped. The bald man raised a hand and gestured. "Come back inside." I took a step backward. He sighed. "You don't understand yet, do you?" I didn't move. His smile widened. "You never left." The world shifted. The city dissolved like smoke, peeling away in layers, revealing what was underneath. And then I saw it. I had never escaped. I was still inside. I had been inside the whole time, and they were waiting for me to realize it. I couldn't breathe. The walls of reality collapsed around me, the familiar city streets dissolving like a mirage. The pavement beneath my feet melted away, replaced by cold, pulsing stone. the same living, breathing floor I had felt in the darkness before. The buildings faded into jagged, shifting monoliths, their surfaces covered in those symbols, the same ones that had burned into my wrist. I had never left. I had been inside the whole time. The bald man stepped forward, his smile never faltering. "You're beginning to see," he said, his voice impossibly calm. "Good, that means you're ready." I took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The eyeless figures had closed in behind me, their movements slow, deliberate, like predators savoring the moment before striking. The air around them warped, shifting unnaturally, as if they weren't completely part of this world. Because they weren't. I wasn't in this world anymore. "Let me go," I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. "You were the one who came to us," the bald man said, tilting his head. "You asked for truth, and now you're standing on the edge of it." I could hear it now, the whispers. They were everywhere, crawling through the walls, curling around my thoughts, filling my ears with words that weren't words at all. My knees buckled as my head throbbed with their weight. "You've seen behind the curtain," the bald man continued. "That's what makes you different. That's why you can never leave." I shook my head. "This isn't real, isn't it?" He reached out, and before I could react, his hand clamped around my wrist, right over the mark. A jolt of pure, searing pain shot through me, like fire racing through my veins. I screamed, falling to my knees as my vision fractured, images flashing before my eyes too fast to comprehend. I saw things I wasn't meant to see. A place beyond this one, vast and endless, where things moved in the dark. Not human, not anything like us. Towering, shapeless beings with too many limbs, too many eyes, watching, waiting. I saw myself standing in the same spot, but my body was wrong. My face was twisted, my skin stretched too tight, my eyes dark pits that swallowed all light. I was screaming, but no sound came out. I saw the church, the rooms beneath it, the tunnels stretching forever downward into places that shouldn't exist. I saw the truth. And I wished I hadn't. The bald man released me, and the vision snapped away like a rubber band breaking. My body collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat, my pulse hammering. The whispers had stopped. The world was silent. I was back inside the church's processing room. The soft glow of the e-meter's lights flickered in the dim space. The auditing chair was still warm beneath me. Across from me, the bald man sat calmly, as if none of it had happened. Had it happened? I looked down at my wrist. The mark was still there, dark, pulsing, seared into my skin, permanent. I wasn't out. I was still inside. I would always be inside. Because now they owned me. I sat frozen in the chair, my entire body trembling. My mind fought to make sense of what had just happened, but every time I tried to piece it together, it slipped away, like a dream unraveling the moment you woke up. But this wasn't a dream. The mark on my wrist was still there. The pain was still real. The whispers, though silent now, had left something behind, something that crawled beneath my skin like a parasite. The bald man studied me, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He was waiting, watching, like he knew exactly what I was going through, like he had seen it happen 1,000 times before. "You're one of us now," he said. His voice was calm, reassuring, but there was something beneath it. Something wrong. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to sit up. My muscles screamed in protest. "No," I whispered. My throat was dry. "I'm not." The bald man laughed, a quiet chuckle, like I'd told him a joke. "Denial is natural," he said. "Everyone struggles at first, but you'll understand soon enough." I pushed myself out of the chair, my legs shaking. I had to get out of there. I had to leave. "You can't leave," he said, reading my mind. "You were never really here to begin with." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I ignored him and stumbled toward the door. My hand grasped the handle, and it turned this time. The door opened. I nearly collapsed with relief as I stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. The air smelled like disinfectant and something sweet, something rotting. I forced myself forward, my breath ragged. The hall stretched longer than before. Doors lined both sides, identical, sterile. Were they there before? I couldn't remember. My head ached trying to think about it. Just keep moving. I passed door after door, but something felt off. Each one had a small window at eye level, covered with wire mesh. I don't know why I looked inside the first one, but I did, and I wished I hadn't. Inside was me, or something that looked like me. A version of myself sat in a chair, staring straight ahead, unblinking, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if frozen mid-thought. The same clothes, the same face, but empty, hollow, like a mannequin wearing my skin. I stumbled back, my breath hitching. I looked into the next room, another version of me, and the next, and the next. Every single room held another me, sitting, waiting. Some twitched, some rocked slightly, as if caught in an unseen loop. Some didn't move at all. I backed away from the doors, bile rising in my throat. I wasn't supposed to see this. You shouldn't wander, the bald man's voice came from behind me. I whirled around. He stood at the end of the hall, his hands still folded in front of him. You might find things that make it harder, he continued, his smile widening. Things that make it worse. My head pounded. I had to keep moving. I turned and ran. The hallway stretched longer, the air grew heavier, the doors multiplied. I ran until my lungs burned, but I wasn't getting anywhere. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, unnatural shadows on the floor. My own shadow didn't match my movements. Then the lights went out. Everything plunged into blackness, silence, then a whisper, close, right next to my ear. You were never meant to leave. A hand grabbed my wrist. The mark burned like fire. I screamed, and the world shifted again. When the lights returned, I was back in the chair, the auditing room, the e-meter in front of me. The bald man sat across from me, his hands still folded. You're making progress, he said. I looked down at my wrist. The mark was darker now, spreading. I couldn't escape. I was trapped. I didn't scream this time. There was no point. It wouldn't change anything. I sat there, staring at my wrist, at the mark that had spread. It no longer looked like just a symbol. The edges had darkened, the lines twisting, shifting, like something alive was beneath my skin, crawling. I could feel it now, moving, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I clenched my fists, trying to ignore the nausea rising in my stomach. The bald man watched me, his expression unchanged. Patient, as if he knew exactly what I was thinking, as if he had seen so many others sit in this same chair, go through this same horror, and come to the same realization. I wasn't leaving. Not really, not ever. You're resisting, he said, tilting his head. That's good. That means you're still fighting. I swallowed hard. Still fighting? What did that mean? His smile widened. But you have to understand. Fighting won't save you. I forced myself to speak. My voice was hoarse, distant. Let me go. He sighed like a disappointed teacher. Go where? I opened my mouth to respond, but then I stopped. Because I didn't know. Where was I trying to go? I thought I had been trying to escape. But escape to what? My head ached. Something was wrong. I tried to remember the last thing I did before I came here, before the church. But there was nothing. Just blankness. A hole where my memories should be. How had I gotten here? I remembered walking into the church, the free personality test, the quiet room, the e-meter. But before that, nothing. Panic wrapped around my throat. I gritted my teeth. You did something to me. We didn't do anything. His voice was calm, so calm. You're simply remembering the truth. This wasn't right. I had a life before this. I had to. I had come here out of curiosity, hadn't I? Hadn't I? The whispers returned. Not in my ears this time, in my head. Soft at first, a gentle hum. Then voices. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew what they were saying. You were always here. There is nothing outside. There was never anything outside. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block them out, but it didn't matter. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside me. The bald man stood. It's time to move forward. I jerked back, gripping the armrests of the chair. Don't touch me. I don't need to. The room shifted. The walls melted, peeling away like layers of skin. The ceiling cracked, revealing darkness. No, Not darkness. Something was there, moving, watching. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The whispers grew louder. The other doors appeared again, lining the walls, stretching endlessly in both directions. Hundreds, thousands. Each one had a different version of me inside. Some were still, some were screaming, some had changed. Their skin was wrong, stretched too thin over jagged bones, their mouths frozen in silent agony. One of them, one of me, turned and looked directly at me. Its face was half gone, peeling away like paper. Beneath the ruined flesh, something else was growing. I lurched out of the chair, stumbling backward. This isn't real. It can't be real. But the bald man just watched, waiting, for me to understand. I turned. The door was still there, wide open, an exit. I ran toward it. The hallway stretched as I moved, growing longer, farther away. The floor beneath my feet softened, like I was running across something alive. Then, a hand shot out of the floor, grasping my ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly. It was me, the other me, the broken, hollow thing from one of the rooms. Its fingers were cold, its grip like iron. "You can't leave," it whispered. The voice wasn't mine. It was all of them, the thousands of me. I tore free, sprinting, my body screaming in pain. The door was getting closer now. I was almost there. I made it. I ran through, expecting to burst onto the street, into the real world, into anything but this nightmare. But I didn't. I slammed into a wall. No, a mirror. I stumbled backward. I was standing in a small white room. No doors, no windows, just the mirror. And in it, I saw them, all of them, the eyeless ones, the whispering figures, the bald man. They were standing behind me. I turned. The room was empty. I faced the mirror again. They were closer. The whispering grew louder. The bald man's voice was the clearest. "There is no escape." My reflection smiled. Not me, my reflection. It raised a hand, and then it reached through the glass. I couldn't move. The reflection's hand, my hand but not mine, emerged from the mirror, its fingers stretching toward me. The skin on it was wrong. Too smooth, too perfect, like something that had never been alive to begin with. The nails were blackened, cracked at the edges, and as the fingers curled, I felt something inside my chest tighten, as if they weren't just reaching for my body, but for something deeper. I tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. The room had shrunk. The walls, pristine white just moments ago, were closing in. The mirror was growing, expanding, swallowing the space around me. I could see them in the reflection, the bald man, the eyeless ones, the shifting, wrong versions of myself waiting just beyond the glass. But when I turned my head to look behind me, there was nothing, just blankness. Empty space where they should have been. A cold sweat slid down my spine. I faced the mirror again. They were closer now. My reflection, the other me, smiled wider, its teeth too sharp, too white, gleaming under the sterile light. I barely had time to react before the hand lunged forward. I screamed as it grabbed my wrist. The moment it touched, the world twisted, pulling me downward, the light around me turning to shadow, the mirror's surface swallowing me whole. I felt my body stretching, shifting, as if I were being pulled apart piece by piece. I couldn't breathe. And then, silence. I opened my eyes. I was back in the church, or at least something that looked like the church. The lobby was eerily empty, no receptionist, no visitors. The walls were still lined with their propaganda posters, smiling faces promising enlightenment, freedom. But the words, they were wrong now. The letters twisted into something else, something I couldn't read. I stepped forward. My body felt heavier, like I was wearing skin that wasn't mine. I turned my hands over, staring at my fingers. They still looked like mine, but something felt off. The mark on my wrist had spread further. The once small symbol was now branching outward, its lines curling up my forearm, dark and pulsing, like veins beneath my skin. I shuddered. I needed to get out. I walked toward the doors. They didn't open. I pressed my palms against the glass. The street outside looked wrong. It wasn't moving. No cars, no people. The world beyond the glass was frozen. Then, a figure moved. I felt my stomach drop. It was standing on the sidewalk across the street, just barely out of focus. A person. No, not a person. I squinted, trying to make out its features, but it was blurred, its form shifting slightly, like it wasn't really there. Then it turned its head. And even from a distance, I felt it. It saw me. The moment our eyes met, the whispers returned. Louder than ever, crawling into my skull like writhing fingers, pressing against the inside of my head. I clenched my teeth, trying to shut them out, but they were everywhere. You are not you. You were never you. Come back to us. I stumbled backward, my head spinning. The air in the church shifted. I wasn't alone. Slowly I turned. They were standing in the hallway, the eyeless ones. Their bodies were still human in shape, clothed in the same buttoned-up uniforms, the same forced smiles, but their eyes were gone. Just smooth, empty skin where their sockets should have been. And yet, they were watching me. I could feel it. The bald man was with them, and now he wasn't smiling. "You're not ready," he said softly. "You're still resisting." I took another step back. "Stay away from me," he sighed. "We tried to guide you through the process, but you still see yourself as separate. You still think there's a way out." "There is." He tilted his head, his expression almost sympathetic. "There never was." The eyeless ones moved, too fast, too wrong. One of them was suddenly right in front of me, its breath cold against my skin. I stumbled back, but it grabbed me. I thrashed, but its grip was like steel. More hands wrapped around me, holding me, pulling me backward. I screamed, and the world fell away. I woke up in the chair, back in the auditing room. The E-meter's lights flickered softly. The bald man sat across from me, his hands still folded neatly in his lap. Like nothing had happened. Like I had never left. But something was different. I looked down at my arms. The mark was everywhere now, not just on my wrist. It had spread across my skin, crawling up my arms, my neck. I reached up, fingers brushing my face. My skin was smooth, too smooth. My hands shook as I grabbed the small mirror on the table. I lifted it. And I stopped breathing. My face was still mine, but my eyes were gone. I couldn't scream. I wanted to, but the sound wouldn't come. I dropped the mirror. It hit the floor and shattered, the pieces reflecting 1,000 twisted versions of me, all of them eyeless. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but the smooth skin where my eyes should have been said otherwise. I raised shaking fingers, pressing them against the empty space. No sockets, no lids, just seamless, unbroken flesh. And yet, I could still see. I looked up at the bald man. He was still seated across from me, his expression calm, patient, like he had seen this before, like he had done this before. What did you do to me?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "You're awakening." "No." I shook my head violently. "No, this isn't happening. This isn't." He leaned forward, folding his hands together. "You always belonged to us. It just took you time to remember." I grabbed at my face, at my skin, digging my nails in, trying to feel something, anything real. But all I felt was smooth flesh, like I had never had eyes to begin with. The bald man watched me struggle, unfazed. "You keep fighting," he murmured. "Even now." He sighed, almost wistfully, and gestured to the door. I hadn't noticed it before. It was standing slightly open, just enough for me to see the hallway beyond. But something was wrong. The air outside the room shifted, like something was waiting, watching. "Go then," he said, "if you really think you can leave." I didn't trust her. The hallway stretched before me, impossibly long, the walls lined with doors, hundreds of them. The carpet beneath my feet felt too soft, like flesh instead of fabric. The overhead lights flickered, buzzing like dying insects. I didn't look back. I kept running, faster and faster, my breath coming in ragged bursts. My vision, if I could even call it that now, blurred at the edges, as if the world itself was coming apart. The whispers started again, soft at first, then rising. I didn't know where they were coming from, the walls, the ceiling, inside me. "You were always here. There is nothing else." I squeezed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside my mind. And then, the hallway ended. A door stood in front of me, tall and black, pulsating like a living thing. I hesitated. The whispers grew louder. There was something behind that door, something waiting. I didn't want to open it. I didn't have a choice. The whispers pushed me forward. I reached for the handle. The moment my fingers touched it, the world broke. I was somewhere else. The sky above me was wrong. Not black, not blue. Just emptiness. A void stretching forever, vast and unending. I stood in the center of something massive, a field of doors, hundreds, thousands. Some of them were open, most were closed, but all of them were pulsing, alive. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Behind me, the eyeless ones stood in rows, watching, waiting. And then, among them, I saw him, the bald man. He wasn't sitting anymore. He stood just a few feet away, hands clasped, head tilted, like a teacher watching a student take their final test. "What is this?" My voice cracked. His eyes darkened. The crossing point. A cold shudder ran through me. "I don't understand." "You will." He raised a hand. The doors began to open. One by one, they creaked apart, revealing glimpses of other places, other versions of me. I saw myself in a small, dark room, curled into a ball, rocking back and forth, whispering to myself. I saw another version of me, standing among the eyeless ones, wearing the same blank smile. I saw a version of me with no skin, a version of me with no mouth, a version of me laughing hysterically, blood dripping from my eyes, my empty, smooth eyes. I staggered back. "No, no, this isn't real. These aren't me." The bald man simply watched. The whispers were deafening now. I clutched my head, trying to drown them out, but they wrapped around me like chains. "Choose." I gasped for air. "What?" "Choose your door." My stomach dropped. I turned wildly, looking at the endless rows of doors, at the versions of myself trapped within them. None of them were real. None of them were me. Were they? The whispering turned to screaming. The doors shook, their hinges rattling. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. The bald man took a step forward. "There is no escape." I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just moved. The ground beneath me rippled, pulsing like it was alive. The doors blurred past me, shifting, twisting. And then, I saw it. A door that wasn't like the others. It was cracked open just slightly. I could see something beyond it, a sliver of light. A different light. Something outside, something real. I didn't think. I lunged for it. The moment I touched it, the world shattered. I felt myself being torn apart, dragged through space, through time, through something deeper than both. And then, I woke up. I was standing on a sidewalk. The sun was shining. People walked past me, talking, laughing, oblivious. I gasped, sucking in air, my entire body shaking. I looked up. The Church of Scientology stood in front of me, exactly as it had been before, as if I had never stepped inside. I lifted a trembling hand to my face. I had eyes again. I turned, ready to run. And that's when I saw him, the bald man, standing across the street, watching me. He smiled, and then he spoke, without moving his lips. "You never left." The moment the words entered my mind, a cold shiver slithered down my spine. "You never left." No, that wasn't possible. I could feel the sun on my skin, hear the chatter of people walking past, smell the faint scent of car exhaust and hot pavement. This was real, wasn't it? I took a step backward, my breath shaky. The bald man didn't move. He stood motionless on the other side of the street, his hands still folded neatly in front of him, his head tilted just slightly. But I could feel his presence pressing against me like an unseen weight. And then the people around me changed. One by one, their movements slowed. Their voices turned into a low, distorted murmur, as if someone had pressed mute on reality itself. I turned in a frantic circle, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The city, the people, the life. It was unraveling. A woman pushing a stroller came to an abrupt stop, her head slowly turning toward me. Her eyes were missing, just smooth, pale skin where they should have been. I stumbled back. I sat frozen in the chair, my breath shallow, my fingers trembling as they curled into the arms of the seat. The air in the room felt thick, as if it had weight, pressing down on me with invisible hands. The bald man was gone. The walls weren't shifting anymore, everything looked normal, but I knew better. I swallowed hard and slowly turned my head toward the mirror. My reflection stared back at me. Same face, same body, same eyes, but they weren't mine. I leaned forward, my pulse roaring in my ears. The reflection mimicked me perfectly, every movement, every tiny twitch. But there was something off, something I couldn't quite place. It was in the eyes, like something else was sitting just behind them, watching, waiting. I exhaled shakily and forced myself to move. I needed to get out of here. Now I stood up, expecting resistance, expecting the world to shift again, for the walls to breathe, for the whispers to start creeping back into my skull, but they didn't. The silence was almost worse. I turned toward the door, hesitating for only a moment before reaching for the handle. This time it opened. The hallway outside was empty. I stepped forward cautiously, my heart hammering. The fluorescent lights above flickered every few seconds, casting brief, jagged shadows along the walls. My shoes made no sound against the carpet. I moved quickly, turning corner after corner, my only goal being the exit. But no matter how many turns I took, I never found it. I swallowed the rising panic in my throat. The hallways all looked identical. The same beige walls, the same framed posters, all plastered with meaningless phrases. The mind is infinite. Doubt is the enemy. Find your true self. I turned again and stopped cold. The hallway stretched longer than before. I took a slow step back, and then, at the farthest end of the corridor, the light went out. A flicker, a pulse of darkness. Then the next light went out, then the next. One by one, the hallway was being swallowed, and something moved in that growing blackness. A shape, a shadow. No, many. I could feel them watching me. I ran, I sprinted down the corridor, blindly turning corners, searching for any sign of the exit. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker, the floor beneath me softening. The shadows behind me moved faster, the whispers started again, not outside, inside my head. "Where do you think you're going?" I didn't answer, I just ran. And then I saw it. The end of the hallway, a door, a different door. This one wasn't beige and sterile like the others. It was old, wooden, dark, almost rotting. And yet, some deep part of me knew this was the way out. I lunged for it. The moment my hand touched the handle, a cold shock ran up my arm, like ice and static all at once. I pushed forward, forcing the door open, and fell through. The street was empty. I hit the pavement hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. The sun was setting. The air was warm. Cars moved along the road in the distance. I gasped, sucking in deep lungfuls of real air. I was outside. I had made it. I forced myself to sit up, my entire body trembling. My hands felt numb, my legs weak, but I didn't care. I was out. I turned my head, looking over my shoulder, and there it was. The Church of Scientology, the same building, the same structure. But it looked wrong, like the angles were slightly off, like the windows were too dark. The front doors were open, wide open, like they were waiting. A cold knot twisted in my stomach. No, I wasn't going back in. I turned away, forcing myself to stand. I needed to get home. I needed to get as far away from this place as possible. I stumbled forward, my limbs still shaky. The sidewalk beneath my feet felt too solid, too real, but I didn't trust it. I didn't trust any of this. And then I heard it. A voice. Software familiar. I turned toward the sound, and my blood ran cold. It was me, standing across the street. Another version of myself, same face, same clothes, same empty eyes. The other me smiled. And in that moment I knew I had never left. I would never leave. Because the thing behind my eyes wasn't me anymore. A man standing at a crosswalk turned toward me next, then another and another, their faces empty. I clutched my head, shaking it violently. No, this wasn't happening. I had left. I had escaped. Hadn't I? The bald man finally moved, slow, deliberate steps as he crossed the street toward me. I wanted to run, I needed to run, but my legs, they wouldn't move. The closer he got, the heavier my body felt, like invisible hands were gripping my limbs, holding me in place, trapping me. He stopped just inches away, the edges of his mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You feel it, don't you?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, echoing inside my skull. "You can see the seams now." I squeezed my eyes shut. "No." He leaned in. "There is no leaving." I opened my mouth to scream, but everything shifted. The world flickered, like an old TV screen glitching out. And then, I was back. I was in the auditing chair again. The e-meter was still clutched in my hands, its wires wrapped tightly around my fingers. The room was exactly the same. The posters, the fluorescent lights, the air, still and heavy. Had I ever left at all? I gasped, throwing the e-meter onto the table and pushing myself back so hard that the chair nearly tipped over. The bald man sat across from me, completely unbothered. Like nothing had happened. Like he had been waiting for me to realize it. "You're resisting again." I shook my head, my chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. No, this isn't real. You did something to me." He studied me carefully, tilting his head. "I didn't do anything. You came to us. You wanted the truth." His voice was calm, collected. It made my skin crawl. "Bullshit," I spat. "I was never supposed to be here." He sighed, almost disappointed. "You're still clinging to the illusion of choice, still pretending there was ever a before." His gaze darkened. "There wasn't." I slammed my hands against the table. "You're lying." He didn't react. "Am I?" And then he lifted a mirror. I froze. It was the same mirror from before, the one I had shattered. But it wasn't broken now. It was whole, smooth, untouched. He turned it toward me, angling it so I could see my own reflection. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly my gaze lifted, and my stomach dropped. I looked exactly the same, except for one thing. My eyes. They were still there, still staring back at me. But they weren't mine. The color was slightly wrong, the shape just a little off. And the more I stared, the more I realized something else was looking through them. Something behind my reflection, inside me. I shot up from my chair, knocking it over. No, this wasn't happening. The bald man remained seated, unfazed. "You're waking up," he murmured. I pressed my hands to my face. My skin felt wrong, like it wasn't mine anymore. "No," I whispered. "No, I'm me. I'm still me." He stood up. I backed away. "Don't come near me." He didn't stop. I turned, running for the door, my fingers wrapped around the handle, pulling. But it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder. Nothing. The walls began to shift. The air rippled. I turned back toward the bald man, my vision warping at the edges. He was standing right in front of me now, close enough that I could feel his breath on my skin. "You've already crossed over." I shook my head violently. "I'm still me." He exhaled, almost in pity, and then he raised his hand and placed 2 fingers against my forehead. The moment he touched me, my mind fractured. I wasn't in the room anymore. I was everywhere. Every version of me. I felt myself in the chair. I felt myself outside, standing on the street. I felt myself in another room, strapped to a bed, staring at a ceiling that pulsed like living flesh. I saw all the doors again, all the possibilities, all the false lives, and in the distance, I saw it. The thing behind the mirror. The thing that had been watching me all along. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a shape. It was just eyes. A mass of them, endless, blinking in unison. And then, they all turned toward me, all at once. I screamed. And the world broke apart. When I woke up, I was sitting in the chair again. The auditing room was silent. The bald man was gone. Everything was gone. Just me. And the mirror. I stared at my reflection, my hands shaking. I had my eyes again. They looked normal. But I knew they weren't mine. I knew something else was inside them now. Watching. Waiting. And worst of all, I couldn't remember what was different. I stood frozen, staring at myself. The other me remained across the street, smiling in that wrong way, lips curved just a little too far, eyes too still. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was like the air itself had thickened, trapping me in place. The street between us stretched longer, warping, twisting, as if the city itself was bending around us. And then the other me tilted its head and stepped forward. My stomach lurched. I forced myself to back away, nearly tripping over the curb. The traffic had stopped. The world around us had gone silent. Just me. And it. It wasn't me. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. I could feel it. That thing inside my reflection, the thing that had been watching from behind my eyes, it had stepped out. And now it was coming for me. I turned and ran. The city blurred past me as I sprinted, my breath ragged, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. But no matter how far I ran, the streets never changed. The same storefronts, the same buildings, the same crosswalk. And every time I glanced over my shoulder, it was still there. Not running, just walking. Steady, unhurried, because it knew I couldn't escape. I gasped, my legs burning, my vision warping at the edges. My body felt wrong, my mind spiraling as memories flickered in and out. The auditing room, the e-meter, the bald man's voice, whispering things I didn't understand. You never left. I stumbled to a stop, gripping my head. No, this wasn't real. I had escaped. I had made it out. Hadn't I? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to steady my breathing. This is real. This is real. This is real. But when I opened them, I was standing outside the church again. The doors were still open, the entrance gaping like a mouth, waiting to swallow me whole. I hadn't moved. I had been running for minutes, maybe hours, and yet I was right back where I started. My knees nearly gave out. And then I felt breath against my neck. It was behind me. I turned, my body moving before my mind could process it, and my own face was inches from mine. I choked on a scream. The other me didn't blink, didn't move. It just stared, studying me, and then it spoke, but not with words, with thoughts, directly in my head. You are going to walk back inside. My stomach knotted. You are going to accept it. I shook my head violently. No, I won't. Its smile widened. You already have. And then, the world shattered. I was inside, the auditing room, the e-meter gripped tightly in my hands, the wires wrapped around my fingers like veins. No, this wasn't possible. I had just been outside. I had just seen myself. I ripped the device away, gasping for breath. The room felt smaller, the air too thick, the walls too close, and across from me, the bald man, watching, waiting, like he had never left, like I had never left. His voice was calm, patient. Are you ready to see now? I shook my head violently. This isn't real. What isn't real? I opened my mouth, but I didn't know how to answer, because I couldn't remember anymore. Where had I been before this? Had I ever really been outside? Had I actually run through the streets, or had I just imagined it? The walls pulsed, my head throbbed. Something was wrong. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I remember leaving. Do you? I tried to focus, tried to picture it, the doors, the street, the air outside, but the memories were blurry, fading, like a dream dissolving the moment you wake up. My chest tightened. No, I knew I had left. Didn't I? I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. The panic that had consumed me just moments ago, it was fading too, like something was erasing it. I looked up at the bald man, my breath catching in my throat. You understand now, don't you? He said softly, and in that moment, I did. I had never left. I would never leave. Because there was nothing to leave. There had never been a city outside these walls, no street, no escape. I was always here. I had always been here. The panic drained from my body. The resistance faded. The other me, the thing that had been following me, was gone. Because it had never existed. Because I had never been running. I was exactly where I had always been. The bald man smiled. Now let's begin again. And I nodded. I sat frozen in the chair, my mind unraveling as the truth sank in. I had never left. The chase through the city, the desperate sprint away from my own reflection, it was all a trick, a false memory, a loop designed to keep me trapped in an illusion of escape. The bald man watched me from across the small room, his fingers interlaced, his expression calm and expectant. "Now let's begin again," he said, and I felt my body betray me as I nodded. Something inside me screamed, fought, but the voice was distant, like an echo fading into nothing. The wires of the e-meter coiled around my wrists like living things, their cold metal pressing into my skin. The machine hummed softly, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to sync with my own heartbeat. "You are ready to accept the truth now," the man said. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What truth?" He tilted his head slightly. "That there is no outside, there is only here. There has always only been here." The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I wanted to protest, to deny it, but my memories were already slipping, crumbling like old paper. I tried to picture the streets, the city, my old life before stepping into the church. But it was all distant, like trying to remember a dream long after waking. Panic surged in my chest. Number I had a life before this. I know I did. "You're lying," I whispered. The bald man simply smiled. "Then prove it." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because I couldn't remember, I tried to picture my apartment, my job, my family, but there was nothing. Just a grey fog where my past should be. A cold realization settled over me. I wasn't losing my memories, they had been taken. A shuddering breath escaped my lips. "What did you do to me?" The bald man leaned forward. "We helped you, we freed you from the illusions that bound you. The confusion, the fear, the lies that you were something separate from us. But you were always meant to be here. You belong to us." I shook my head violently. No, that's not true." I ripped the e-meter wires off my wrists and staggered to my feet. The room seemed to stretch and contract, the walls pulsing like something alive. I lunged for the door. It wouldn't open. I pulled harder, my breath ragged, my fingers slipping against the handle. Behind me, the bald man sighed. "You are still resisting. That's unfortunate." The lights above flickered, and then the whispers returned. Not outside, inside, in my head. "Stay, stay, stay, stay." I gasped, clutching my skull as the voices drilled into my mind. My knees buckled, the room tilting sideways. The whispers weren't just words. They were erasing me, taking the last parts of me that still remembered the truth. I collapsed against the wall, my vision dimming, the voices swelling, consuming everything. And then, silence. I woke up smiling. The room was warm, the air soft, the light filtering through the curtains golden and peaceful. I sat up, stretching, feeling a deep sense of calm, of purpose. I wasn't afraid anymore, because there was nothing to fear. I turned, my heart swelling with gratitude as I looked across the room. The bald man sat in his chair, watching me with kind, knowing eyes. "How do you feel?" he asked. I smiled wider. "I feel whole." He nodded. "Good, that means you're ready." I stood up, my body light, my mind clear. I understood now. There had never been an outside. There had never been anything before this. There was only the church. I belonged here, and now I was finally free.